In this podcast episode, Tucker Carlson interviews Dave Smith, a libertarian, about a wide range of topics, including Russia, Israel, Trump, the swamp, Obama, and the media attacks on Joe Rogan. Despite their differing political affiliations, Smith and Carlson find common ground on many issues, particularly their shared skepticism of Washington, D.C.'s corruption and the seductive nature of power that leads individuals to compromise their principles. Smith highlights the Mises Institute in Auburn, Alabama, as an example of a libertarian organization that intentionally avoids D.C. to steer clear of corruption. The conversation delves into the history of conservatism in America, with Smith noting that conservatives have often opposed the consolidation of power in D.C., but have ultimately accepted and even promoted big government initiatives. They discuss the failure of conservatives and libertarians to effectively push back against government overreach, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, where lockdowns and restrictions on personal freedoms were implemented with little resistance from conservative media. Smith emphasizes the lack of courage and dissent in conservative and libertarian circles, noting that speaking out against mainstream narratives can lead to being ostracized and smeared. He gives examples of controversial topics like the lab leak theory and the treatment of the Kurds, where dissenting views were met with harsh criticism. He underscores the importance of standing up for truth and honesty, even in the face of backlash. The role of libertarians in the U.S. and the need for a balance between libertarian principles and conservative values is another key topic. Smith suggests that libertarians should not only advocate for limited government intervention, but also uphold good family values and societal norms. He points out that while libertarians like Ron Paul have been consistent in their beliefs, other libertarian groups funded by oligarchs may not always align with true libertarian ideals. Carlson and Smith discuss the power dynamics in Washington, D.C., with Carlson noting the federal government's unprecedented influence. They highlight the parasitic nature of the government, which thrives on taxpayer money and contributes to corruption at every level. Smith argues that draining the swamp requires cutting government spending and reducing the power of D.C., as long as it remains the epicenter of power and influence. The conversation touches on the shift in the Democratic Party under Bill Clinton, who declared a ceasefire between the party and the business community during the tech boom. This change led to a shift in the party's stance on wealth and power, with Democrats embracing billionaires and tech moguls. Smith and Carlson discuss the implications of this shift on the balance of power and the influence of money in politics. Smith also comments on the changing attire of the wealthy elite, noting how they have transitioned from formal suits to casual clothing like t-shirts and hoodies. This shift in attire symbolizes a lack of obligation to society and a sense of superiority among the wealthy class. Smith emphasizes the importance of acknowledging privilege and the responsibilities that come with it, rather than downplaying one's status. The conversation then moves towards the 2008 financial crisis and the subsequent economic recovery under Obama's administration. Smith criticizes Obama for continuing and expanding the Bush administration's policies, leading to a culture war as a distraction from the failures of his presidency. The discussion highlights the impact of zero interest rates on asset prices and the economy, ultimately leading to malinvestment and a looming financial crisis. The podcast also addresses the disparity between taxes on labor and capital gains, with Smith questioning why there is a discrepancy in the tax rates. He argues that the current tax system penalizes working individuals while favoring those with capital investments, leading to financial struggles for many Americans. The conversation delves into the impact of inflation on grocery prices and the burden of debt on individuals, highlighting the need for a fairer tax system that benefits the average person. Smith shares his involvement in libertarian politics and the internal conflicts within the Libertarian Party. He discusses the Ron Paul revolution and the disappointment with candidates like Gary Johnson and Bill Weld, who failed to represent true libertarian values. He recounts his group's takeover of the party to ensure it aligns with libertarian principles and opposes government overreach and virtue signaling. The conversation shifts to the recent conflict in Gaza, with Smith expressing his views on the situation. He criticizes the neoconservative strain in American politics and highlights the need for the Libertarian Party to challenge the Republicans to be better. He believes that the Libertarian Party can play a role in pushing for a more America-first approach in politics. The discussion then moves to the war in Ukraine and the role of the U.S. in the conflict. Smith points out the provocations that led to the war and criticizes the U.S. for its involvement. He highlights the role of the intelligence agencies in pushing for conflict and the lack of evidence to support claims of Russian interference in the 2016 elections. Smith shares his experience of visiting Iraq in 2003 and how it changed his perspective on the war. He describes the chaos and violence he witnessed, as well as his interactions with military officials. Smith expresses his disgust at the glorification of war and the use of women in combat roles. The conversation delves into the motivations behind the Iraq War and the manipulation of public opinion by a small group of individuals. Smith reflects on the lies and misinformation that were used to justify the war and the consequences of U.S. intervention in Iraq. One of the key points discussed is the clean break strategy, a document written in 1996 by Richard Pearl and David Wormser, among others. The strategy outlined a shift away from the peace process in the Middle East and towards a more aggressive approach, including the overthrow of Saddam Hussein. Smith highlights how this strategy ultimately influenced the actions of the George W. Bush administration post 9/11. The conversation also touches on the events of 9/11, with Smith expressing skepticism towards the official narrative and raising questions about potential government involvement or prior knowledge of the attacks. He emphasizes the need to be critical of government explanations and highlights the lack of transparency surrounding classified documents related to 9/11. Smith further discusses the backlash he faced for questioning the use of nuclear bombs during World War II, particularly the bombing of Nagasaki. Despite acknowledging the complexities of the historical context, he asserts that incinerating civilians is inherently evil and questions why this viewpoint sparked controversy, especially within right-wing circles. The podcast also delves into the legacy of Winston Churchill and the aftermath of World War II, with Smith critiquing Churchill's decisions and the impact of the war on Britain. He challenges the glorification of Churchill and questions the defense of his actions, pointing to the long-term consequences of the war and its role in shaping the American empire. The podcast also touches on the media's role in shaping public perception and the attacks on individuals like Joe Rogan. Smith discusses the power dynamics at play in the media and the influence of certain narratives on public discourse. He praises Rogan for his genuine and generous nature, mentioning how Rogan has changed the lives of many people, including himself. He attributes his own success to appearing on Rogan's podcast, which significantly boosted his audience and income. Smith and Carlson discuss the authenticity of Rogan and how he remains the same person on and off camera, highlighting the importance of honesty and integrity in a world where many people in the media industry are phony. The conversation then delves into the decline of the country, with Smith expressing his concerns about the national debt, ongoing wars, political divides, and cultural insanity. Despite these challenges, he finds solace in his personal relationships, particularly with his family. He talks about how becoming a husband and father has brought deeper meaning and happiness to his life. Smith reflects on his upbringing in a single-parent household and how it has influenced his approach to family life. He credits his mother for instilling good values in him and acknowledges the role of luck in meeting his wife, whom he describes as the best person he has ever met. He emphasizes the importance of commitment and dedication in marriage, viewing it as a lifelong partnership. The conversation touches on the impact of the baby boomer generation on society, with Smith criticizing their selfish attitudes and normalization of casual divorce. He believes that marriage is a sacred commitment that should be honored and upheld, even in the face of challenges. Smith and Carlson share their experiences of happy marriages and the importance of staying committed to their partners. Smith also touches on the idea of democracy being an illusion as the true power lies in the hands of the ruling class. However, he acknowledges that there is always a form of democracy present, as the government needs the tacit acceptance of the people to function. He expresses hope in the power of ideas and the ability to spread information, which can ultimately lead to positive change. Another point of discussion is the shift away from US hegemony internationally, which Smith sees as both scary and necessary. He believes that the unipolar moment, where the US was the world's reserve currency, was detrimental to the country. He mentions how getting off the gold standard and printing money freely led to economic issues and a loss of national identity. He sees the transition away from being the world's reserve currency as a positive step towards regaining a sense of national integrity. Smith also reflects on the concept of unearned wealth, using the analogy of being handed $1 billion. He explains how receiving such a large sum of money without earning it could have negative consequences, as it may disrupt familial relationships and personal integrity. He emphasizes the importance of working for what one has and the value of earning one's success. Throughout the podcast, Smith expresses his admiration for individuals like Teddy Roosevelt, who stood up against the ruling class and prioritized the interests of the common people. He sees Trump as having similar qualities, as someone who challenges the status quo and is not afraid to go against the establishment. He appreciates those who prioritize authenticity and integrity over power and influence.